All right, so we're going to be looking at some jumps from athletic and non-athletic participants. Here we have the athletic from this anterior and posterior view. Not a lot going on, keeping those knees kind of straight in line with the toes as he jumps down. As we can see from the side, he has a little bit of heel uh, lift when he comes down, is maybe not a lot of dorsiflexion and flexibility, so his heels are coming off the ground a little bit as he lands. Knee flexion, hip flexion is pretty standard, not a lot. It looks like he's keeping a pretty upright posture as he lands, and this is from a 16-inch height. As we switch over to the 20-inch height, we see a little bit more of hip flexion, as well as knee flexion, a little bit more dorsiflexion. It looks like he's got a little bit more of a varus of his knees as he lands from the side. Again, you still see that a little bit of compensation from the lack of dorsiflexion in both of his ankles. A little bit of knee flexion increase as well as hip flexion. Again, he looks like he's still trying to stay upright, but you can still see those heels kind of coming off of the ground from that lack of flexibility in the ankles. As we switch over to the 24-inch height, now we're seeing a significantly more hip flexion, knee flexion. Also looks like a lot more varus of the knees as he lands. As we look from the side, we see again that heel is coming off, but this time we're also seeing the toes rise, which could be indicative of a balance issue, as well as him using his arms to kind of counterbalance his weight, feeling like it's going backwards. He's bringing his arms forward. Um, Again, with that wide varus of the knees, it looks like he has a little bit of less dorsiflexion. Again, and then that balance issue of having his weight fall backwards, looks like he's putting his arms forward. So, like we see, increase in hip flexion as the height increases. Looking at the knees, it looks like it's going to be a gradual increase in knee flexion. The higher he goes, that middle one looks a little bit of, might be atypical. But then looking at the ankles, it looks like a gradual decrease in dorsiflexion, and that might be because of his increase in his varus of his knees for the higher jumps. Now we look at the non-athletic. From here, we can see a lot of valgus collapse when she lands. From this anterior and posterior view from the side, not a lot of hip flexion. It looks like she kind of drops into knee flexion and kind of pops right into extension. And that might be because of that valgus position. She kind of just goes right back up. Again, this is that 16-inch height. Not a lot of hip flexion. Now we go into a little bit of a higher jump. This is 20 inches. She kind of stumbles off of the platform here. But again, we see those valgus collapse of the knees. She comes together from the side. Again, not a lot of dorsiflexion and not a lot of hip flexion. It looks like possibly less knee flexion this time as she goes down. But again, that initial foot coming down, you can see all of her weight is kind of going into that right foot as she lands. Now going from a bigger height, this is 24 inches, a lot higher than she is used to. She kind of jumps off of the platform this time. Again, we're looking at that valgus collapse of those knees from the side. Not a lot of dorsiflexion. She actually comes off onto her heels, landing more on her toes than anything else. Knee flexion is still minimal. A little bit more hip flexion. That looks like as she goes down. Again, losing her balance a little bit, so she starts to walk forward. So here we see the increased hip flexion for as the jump gets higher, her hip flexion increases. We're looking at knee flexion. It looks like they're possibly around the same 60 to 75 range, or 65 to 75 range. But also her ankle dorsiflexion is pretty standard. That middle one might be an outlier at 7 degrees. As we go into seeing a more of a plyometric jump from the athletic participant, we see again keeping those knees in line with the toes as he jumps and lands with a more of an explosive behavior from that eccentric load into that concentric jump. Um, he uses his arms to help counterbalance his body and propel himself forward up into the air. Again, taking advantage of those muscle spindle fibers, trying to get the best height advantage he can get from a quick stretch into a concentric contraction by the quads and the glutes here, as well as the um, triceps surae um, behind him. As we go into an athletic, we can see again that valgus collapse, significantly less height in her jump, as well as um, less or a longer uh, phase of amortization, which is just that eccentric loading phase. Looks like she kind of gets stuck as she descends, where she has a pause before switching from eccentric to concentric contraction. Not a lot going on with the arm. She kind of doesn't use them to her best advantage, which is expected because she's not an athletic person. And that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. We hope you have a great day.